My name is Laura, 35 years old, and until last year, I was just a dedicated principal investigator at BioVital Research Institute. When we secured that $80 million grant from the National Health Institute, I never imagined I would be facing off with Cameron Foster, the CEO's entitled son. The moment he ordered me to transfer funds illegally still rings in my ears. His laughter stopped abruptly when a federal agent walked in and changed everything. Before I tell you how I uncovered the biggest grant fraud in medical history, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to never miss stories about standing up for truth against all odds. I joined BioVital Research Institute 3 years ago, after completing my doctorate in molecular biology at Stanford University. My research focused on developing treatments for neurodegenerative diseases, a passion that began when my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's during my undergraduate years. When the opportunity to lead my own lab at BioVital came up, it felt like the perfect next step in my career. The institute had a stellar reputation, cutting-edge facilities, and most importantly, a commitment to translational research that could actually help patients. Walter Foster, the founder and CEO of BioVital, personally recruited me. He was an old-school scientist turned businessman who understood both the scientific process and the realities of funding research in today's competitive environment. During my interview, he spoke passionately about his vision for creating treatments that would actually reach patients, not just generate impressive journal articles. I was sold on his vision and the resources BioVital could offer my research program. My first 2 years at BioVital were everything I had hoped for. My lab was growing steadily. We were publishing in good journals, and we had developed some promising compounds that showed potential for treating early-stage Parkinson's disease. The preliminary data was strong enough that I decided to apply for a major grant from the National Institutes of Health, specifically their Transformative Research Award program. The application process was grueling. For 6 months, my team and I worked nights and weekends, refining our research proposal, gathering preliminary data, and building a comprehensive 5-year plan that could potentially revolutionize how we treat neurodegenerative disorders. We proposed a novel approach combining gene therapy with small molecule activators that could potentially restore neuronal function in damaged areas of the brain. When we submitted the grant, I was proud of our work but realistic about our chances. The NIH Transformative Research Program is notoriously competitive, with a funding rate below 5%. I told my team to expect rejection and to be ready to revise and resubmit. Then on an ordinary Tuesday morning, I received the email that changed everything. Our grant had been approved for full funding at $80 million over 5 years. I remember staring at my computer screen in disbelief, reading and rereading the award letter before calling my lab manager, Grace Williams, into my office to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. The news spread through BioVital like wildfire. Walter Foster hosted a champagne toast in the main atrium, praising our team's innovation and hard work. It was the largest single grant in BioVital's 15-year history, and everyone was riding high on the excitement. What none of us knew at the time was that Walter Foster was planning his retirement. 3 weeks after our grant celebration, he announced that he would be stepping down as CEO within the month, transitioning to a role as chairman of the board. His replacement would be Alicia Henderson, the current chief operating officer, who had been with the company almost since its founding. This transition seemed reasonable and well-planned. What surprised everyone was the announcement that Walter's son, Cameron Foster, would be joining the executive team as Director of Special Projects. Cameron was 28 years old with an MBA from Wharton, but no scientific background or research experience. The official announcement emphasized his experience in venture capital and his vision for commercializing BioVital's innovative research pipeline. My first impression of Cameron was that he was charming, but clearly out of his depth. During his introduction tour of the facilities, he asked basic questions about what different lab equipment was for, yet spoke with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged there. He dressed in expensive suits that seemed impractical for a research environment, and had a habit of interrupting scientific discussions with business jargon that rarely applied to the situation. 2 days after our grant funding officially began, Cameron scheduled a meeting with me. His assistant booked 30 minutes, but he arrived 15 minutes late, apologizing vaguely about strategic calls running long. Once seated in my office, he leaned back comfortably and offered effusive congratulations on the grant. "This is exactly the kind of big win BioVital needs," he said, flashing. What I would soon learn was his signature smile. $80 million is game-changing. I'm here to make sure you have everything you need to make this project a massive success. I thanked him and began explaining our research timeline and the key milestones we hope to hit in the first year. That's great, he said, waving his hand dismissively before I could finish. But I'm more interested in how we can leverage this success. Have you thought about spin-off companies, licensing opportunities? We should be thinking about the commercial applications from day one. I explained that commercialization was premature, that we first needed to prove our approach worked in our models before thinking about clinical applications. That's the old way of thinking, Cameron said with a confident smirk. In today's market, you need to build the brand while the science is still developing. I have some connections in the biotech venture world who would be very interested in what you're doing. The meeting ended with Cameron promising to open doors for my research, and me feeling vaguely unsettled, but unable to pinpoint exactly why. I chalked it up to the natural tension between scientific and business priorities and decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, Walter Foster had built this company on solid scientific principles. Surely his son would respect that foundation. That assumption would prove to be the first of many mistakes I made in understanding who Cameron Foster really was, and what his presence at BioVital would mean for my research, my career, and ultimately my safety. 2 weeks after the grant officially began, I received an email from Cameron requesting a private meeting to discuss strategic resource allocation for the NIH initiative. The formal tone of the email, so different from his casual demeanor in our first meeting, immediately put me on alert. Still, as the principal investigator on an $80 million grant, I expected interest from the executive team. We met in a small conference room rather than my office or his. Cameron arrived with a leather portfolio and a tablet, more prepared than I had seen him before. After minimal small talk, he got straight to the point. "I've been reviewing the grant budget," he said, sliding a printed spreadsheet across the table. "I think we need to make some adjustments to maximize impact." I looked at the document, which showed our original NIH-approved budget on the left and a revised allocation on the right. The differences were substantial and immediately concerning. The revised version reduced equipment purchases by 20%, cut 2 proposed postdoctoral positions, and slashed our animal model costs by 30%. Most alarmingly, it created a new category called Strategic Consulting Services that accounted for 15% of the total budget. "This doesn't align with our approved grant proposal," I said carefully. "The NIH approved a specific budget based on our research needs. These changes would significantly impact our ability to complete the proposed work." Cameron leaned forward, his expression shifting to one I hadn't seen before, more calculating than friendly. "The budget is a guideline, not a straitjacket. All grants have flexibility built in for administrative discretion." "That's not accurate," I replied, pushing the paper back toward him. "NIH grants, especially those of this size, have very specific rules about budget reallocation. Any change over 10% in a major category requires formal approval, and this new consulting category wasn't in our proposal at all." "The consulting is to accelerate commercialization pathways," Cameron said smoothly. "I have connections with experts who can help position our discoveries for maximum impact." "That's not what this grant is for," I explained. "This is a basic and translational research grant. Commercialization isn't part of the approved scope." Cameron's expression hardened slightly. "Laura, I understand you're a scientist, but I'm trying to help you think bigger. These consultants can open doors for future funding patents, even spin-off companies where you could have equity." The implication was clear enough that I felt a chill. He was suggesting using grant money to pay his friends as consultants, with the promise of personal financial benefit down the line. This wasn't just against NIH rules, it bordered on fraud. "I appreciate the thought, but we need to stick to the approved budget," I said firmly. "NIH funds are federal money with strict compliance requirements. I'm legally responsible, as the principal investigator, for ensuring proper use of these funds. Cameron's face briefly showed annoyance before he recovered his smile, though it didn't reach his eyes this time. Of course. Of course. Just ideas to consider. We can revisit this later, when you've had time to think about the bigger picture. He gathered his papers and left acting as though nothing unusual had happened. But something had fundamentally shifted in our dynamic, and we both knew it. That afternoon I sought out Grace Williams, my lab manager and most trusted colleague. Grace had been at BioVital for 5 years before I arrived, and knew the institutional politics better than anyone. Something weird happened with Cameron Foster today, I told her after closing my office door. I recounted the meeting and the proposed budget changes. Grace's normally cheerful expression grew serious. That's concerning, especially the consulting fees. Do you know who these consultants would be? He didn't say specifically, just connections from his venture capital days. I've heard rumors, Grace said hesitantly. Nothing concrete, but people have noticed Cameron bringing in old friends for interviews, even when there aren't open positions that match their qualifications. This was the first I'd heard of this. What kind of positions? Administrative mostly. Finance, operations, legal. Nothing on the research side yet. Over the next few weeks I paid closer attention to the comings and goings in the executive wing. Cameron seemed to be spending an unusual amount of time with Thomas Reynolds, our chief financial officer, a quiet man who had been handling BioVital's finances since the company's early days. One evening, working late, I passed by a conference room and overheard Cameron and Thomas in what sounded like a heated discussion. The door was slightly ajar, and I caught fragments that made me pause. The allocation has to be more creative than that, Cameron was saying. We need flexibility within the reporting structure. There are limits to what we can do with federal funds, Thomas replied, his voice strained. These aren't private investments. Everything has gray areas, Thomas. Find them. I moved on quickly before they noticed me, but the exchange confirmed my growing suspicions that something wasn't right. I began reviewing all financial documentation related to our grant with a more critical eye. The official reports showed everything proceeding according to our approved budget, but I noticed small discrepancies. Equipment purchases delayed for vague reasons. Hiring processes for key personnel, moving at a glacial pace despite our urgent research timeline. Supply orders modified from what my team requested. None of these issues alone was enough to raise serious alarms, but together they formed a pattern of interference that was hampering our research progress. And without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, I wasn't sure how to address my concerns or who I could trust to take them seriously. Cameron, meanwhile, maintained a friendly public persona. In all staff meetings, he praised the NIH project as BioVital's crown jewel. He invited me to present our research plans to the board of directors, where he introduced me with glowing accolades. To anyone watching, he appeared to be the grant's biggest champion. But in private, the pressure to reconsider budget allocations continued growing more insistent with each passing week. I began documenting everything. Every email, every meeting, every requested change to our research plan or budget. I wasn't sure what I was building evidence for, but my instincts told me I would need it someday. 3 months into the grant, Cameron's interference took a new and more troubling direction. He began inserting himself into scientific decisions that were completely outside his expertise. It started with questions during our weekly research updates. While the other executives focused on timeline and progress metrics, Cameron began asking pointed questions about our methodological choices. Why were we using this animal model instead of that one? Had we considered outsourcing our cell culture work? Wouldn't it be more efficient to use contract research organizations for our preclinical testing? Each suggestion conveniently aligned with moving portions of our work, and consequently our budget outside BioVital, to external vendors. When I asked for specifics on these suggested partners, they invariably turned out to be companies with some connection to Cameron's previous venture capital network. The pressure to approve expenses unrelated to our research also intensified. Purchase orders for unnecessary equipment would appear in my approval queue. Requests to hire administrative staff on the grant budget landed on my desk. Travel authorizations for conferences with no relevance to our work needed my signature. I rejected them all, citing NIH guidelines and our approved research plan. Each rejection seemed to increase the tension, though Cameron maintained his friendly facade in public. The situation came to a head during a mid-quarter review with the executive team. I was presenting our preliminary data when Cameron interrupted with an unexpected critique. "I've been consulting with some experts in the field," he said, "and they have concerns about your approach. The gene therapy vector you're using is outdated. There are more advanced systems available through Nexus Biotherapeutics." I was momentarily speechless. The vector system we were using was cutting edge, something my lab had helped develop and validate over years of careful work. "That's not accurate," I finally replied. "Our viral vector system has demonstrated superior neuronal tropism in 3 independent studies. Nexus uses a modified system actually based on our original work. Their modifications make it 20% more efficient," Cameron insisted. "According to whom?" I asked. "We haven't seen any peer-reviewed data supporting that claim." "According to their internal studies," Cameron said. "I've seen the data personally. Unpublished, non-peer-reviewed data from a company trying to sell us their product isn't sufficient evidence to change our approach," I explained, aware of the growing discomfort among the other executives in the room. "Our current system is working well and is part of our approved research plan." "Your resistance to innovation is concerning," Cameron said, his tone hardening. "This is exactly why academic scientists struggle to create real-world impact." The CFO, Thomas Reynolds, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should table this discussion for a smaller group meeting." "No," I said firmly. "This is an important scientific decision that affects our entire research program. I want everyone to understand that our methodological choices are evidence-based and carefully considered, not arbitrary." After the meeting, Alicia Henderson, the CEO, pulled me aside. "You need to be more diplomatic with Cameron," she advised. "He has the board's ear, especially his father's." "This isn't about diplomacy," I replied. "It's about scientific integrity and proper use of grant funds." "Just try to find middle ground," she suggested. "Walter wants his son to succeed in this role." It was becoming clear that Cameron had more institutional support than I had initially realized, despite his lack of scientific credentials. Over the following weeks, he seemed to be systematically working to undermine my authority and credibility. I began to notice that some of my emails weren't being responded to promptly. Staff meetings were occasionally scheduled, when I had known conflicts. More disturbingly, rumors began circulating about my management style and research decisions, mischaracterizations that could only have come from someone with access to our internal discussions. Grace confirmed my suspicions one afternoon. "People are talking, Laura. Cameron has been having one-on-one meetings with some of your team members." "What kind of meetings?" I asked. "The kind where he asks leading questions about your decision-making and whether you're open to new approaches," Grace said grimly. "He's building a narrative that you're resistant to innovation and overly controlling." More troubling still, I noticed that when positions opened in my lab, the candidates being sent for interviews were increasingly people with connections to Cameron, rather than the most qualified applicants. 2 new research associates who joined the team seemed to report informally to Cameron, coming and going for unexplained meetings and appearing oddly uncomfortable when discussing certain aspects of our work. I needed to understand what was happening before things deteriorated further. Late one evening, after most staff had left, I began a more thorough review of our financial documentation, cross-referencing the NIH reporting with our internal tracking systems. The discrepancies were subtle, but concerning expenses categorized in ways that obscured their true purpose: purchase orders that didn't match actual deliveries, consulting fees to entities with vague service descriptions. As I dug deeper, I discovered emails between Cameron and several outside companies discussing special consulting arrangements and alternative compensation structures. None mentioned our NIH grant directly, but the timing aligned perfectly with our funding timeline. My investigation was interrupted by the sound of the office door opening. I looked up to see Thomas Reynolds standing in the doorway, clearly surprised to find me there. On his desk was a stack of financial reports, several with our grant number clearly visible. "Working late?" he asked, his voice unnaturally casual. "Just reviewing some budget items," I replied. "You're here late too." "End of quarter reconciliation," he said, moving to his computer and angling the screen away from my line of sight. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow, though." I pretended to gather my things while surreptitiously watching him. He wasn't working on reconciliation. He appeared to be deleting files. I left the finance office but didn't go home. Instead, I waited in my car until I saw Thomas leave the building nearly an hour later. He was carrying his laptop, but not the stack of reports I'd seen earlier. That night I called Michael Bryant, an old colleague, who now worked at the NIH Office of Research Integrity. We had attended graduate school together and had maintained a friendly professional relationship over the years. "I need hypothetical advice," I began after exchanging brief pleasantries. "That's never good," Michael replied with a knowing chuckle. "What's going on, Laura?" I outlined the situation, without mentioning specific names or amounts, just the pattern of events and my growing concerns. "This doesn't sound hypothetical," Michael said when I finished. "It sounds like potential grant fraud." "I'm not sure I have enough evidence," I admitted. "It's mostly circumstantial at this point." "If what you're describing is happening, it's serious," Michael said, his tone grave. "Misappropriation of federal research funds is a federal crime. Multiple agencies could get involved, including the FBI. "I don't want to make accusations without being certain," I said. "That's wise," Michael agreed. "Document everything. Get copies of financial records. Secure your email communications. And Laura, be careful. People who commit this kind of fraud have a lot to lose if they're exposed." His warning sent a chill through me, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about my research anymore. It was about the integrity of the scientific process and the proper use of taxpayer money intended to help develop treatments for devastating diseases. The next day, I began systematically copying documentation and securing it outside the BioVital system. I didn't know when I would need it, but I was increasingly certain that day would come. The situation reached a breaking point in the 4th month of our grant. Cameron called an emergency meeting of the entire research team on a Friday afternoon. The conference room was packed with my lab members, several executives, including Thomas Reynolds, and a woman I didn't recognize who was introduced as Rebecca Daniels, newly hired legal counsel for BioVital. Cameron stood at the head of the table, more formal than I had ever seen him, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of grave concern. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. "I've called this meeting to discuss some necessary restructuring of our NIH grant project." My stomach tightened. This was the first I was hearing of any restructuring. After extensive consultation with industry experts and our financial team, Cameron continued, "We've determined that our current approach is too siloed and academically focused. We need to pivot toward a more translational model with greater external collaboration." He clicked to a PowerPoint slide, showing a dramatic reorganization of our research plan. Gone were 2 of our core research aims, replaced with vague objectives about commercial pathway development and strategic partnerships. Most alarmingly, the budget chart showed nearly 30% of our funds redirected to external partners. Effective immediately, Cameron announced we'll be transferring these portions of the work to our strategic partners at Nexus Biotherapeutics and Quantum Health Analytics. Both companies offer specialized expertise that will accelerate our timeline to clinical relevance. I couldn't remain silent any longer. This is the first I'm hearing about this restructuring, and as principal investigator, any changes to our research plan require my approval and formal amendments to the NIH. Cameron smiled tightly. "We've already begun the paperwork. We just need your signature on a few documents to formalize the changes." "I haven't agreed to any changes," I said firmly, "and I won't approve reallocating 30% of our budget to external companies with no proven expertise in our research area." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Everyone was watching our exchange like a tennis match head swiveling between us. Cameron's expression hardened. This isn't a request, Dr. Green. This is a strategic directive from executive leadership. That's not how federal grants work, I replied, feeling heat rise in my face. The NIH awarded this grant based on a specific research plan with me as principal investigator. The institution cannot unilaterally change that plan without NIH approval, which requires my endorsement as PI. Cameron slammed his hand on the table, his composed facade cracking. Your first task is to transfer the grant funds, he shouted, startling everyone in the room. This company needs to see return on its investment. I'm not your employee. I shot back, standing to face him directly. I'm the principal investigator. My obligation is to the research and to the proper use of federal funds. You work for BioVital, Cameron said, his voice dangerously quiet now. And BioVital can replace you. Actually, they can't, I replied. Only the NIH can approve a change in principal investigator, and they would need significant justification, not just a desire to redirect funds against grant terms. We'll see about that, Cameron said with a dismissive laugh. I expect your full cooperation by Monday morning. The board meets at 9 a.m. to finalize these changes. I suggest you reconsider your position before then if you value your career. He gathered his materials and strode out of the room, leaving a stunned silence behind him. Thomas Reynolds followed quickly after avoiding eye contact with anyone. The new lawyer lingered, studying me with an unreadable expression before finally following the others out. Grace approached me as the room began to clear. What are you going to do? She whispered. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'm not signing those transfer authorizations. That evening, as I was still in my office, trying to process what had happened and plan my next steps, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Dr. Laura Green? An unfamiliar female voice asked when I answered. Yes, who's calling? Someone who knows what's happening at BioVital, the voice replied. I can't tell you who I am, but you need to be careful. Cameron Foster has been systematically diverting research funds since he arrived. Your grant is just the latest and largest target. Who is this? I asked again, heart pounding. A concerned party. Check the financial records for shell companies named Quantum Analytics and Nexus Holdings. They both trace back to Cameron's former business partner from his VC days. Before I could ask another question, the caller hung up. I immediately began cross-referencing the companies mentioned against the documents I had been gathering. Sure enough, both were registered at the same address in Delaware, and both had been incorporated just weeks before Cameron joined BioVital. I spent half the night organizing my evidence and securing backup copies. Early Saturday morning, I contacted Michael Bryant at the NIH. It's worse than I thought, I told him, explaining the confrontation and the anonymous call. I have documentation showing systematic attempts to divert grant funds to shell companies connected to Cameron Foster. Michael was silent for a long moment. Laura, I need to tell you something. You're not the first person to raise concerns about BioVital. There's already an active investigation into their financial practices. What? I was stunned. Since when? I can't share details, but your grant caught attention because of its size and some red flags in early expenditure reports. The Department of Health and Human Services Inspector General is involved, and they've brought in the FBI. What should I do? I asked. I'm going to connect you with the lead investigator, Special Agent Diana Rodriguez, Michael said. She'll want to see your evidence before Monday's board meeting. Within an hour, I received a call from Agent Rodriguez. We arranged to meet early Sunday morning at a coffee shop far from BioVital's campus. Agent Rodriguez was not what I expected. Rather than the stern, intimidating figure I had imagined, she was a petite woman with an unassuming demeanor that probably helped people underestimate her. Her questions were precise and thorough, and she reviewed my documentation with careful attention. You've been very thorough, she said after examining everything. This corroborates what we've been gathering and adds significant new evidence. What happens now? I asked. We've been building a case against Cameron Foster and several accomplices for months, she explained. Your evidence gives us enough to move forward, but we need to catch them in the act of attempted fund diversion. That board meeting tomorrow might be our opportunity. You want me to go to the meeting? I asked, surprised. Yes, she confirmed. I'll be there too, posing as a financial consultant. We need you to let the meeting proceed normally, until they explicitly attempt to authorize the fund transfers. Won't that be dangerous? We'll have agents nearby, she assured me. Your role is just to let the conversation happen naturally, so we can document the attempted fraud. I agreed to the plan, though sleep was impossible that night. The next morning I arrived at BioVital with my heart racing but resolve firm. This was about more than my career or even my research. It was about the integrity of scientific funding and stopping corruption that undermined the entire research enterprise. The boardroom was already half full when I arrived precisely at 9 a.m. Walter Foster, the former CEO and Cameron's father, sat at the head of the table, his face solemn. I hadn't seen him in months, and he looked older, somehow more careworn than I remembered. Around the table sat the other board members, a mix of scientists and investors who governed BioVital's overall direction. Cameron sat at Walter's right hand, impeccably dressed, and wearing an expression of confident anticipation. Thomas Reynolds sat nearby, a folder of documents before him, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The new lawyer, Rebecca Daniels, was reviewing papers with another woman I didn't recognize. And there, sitting quietly in the corner with a laptop and notepad, was Agent Rodriguez, wearing glasses she hadn't had the day before, and professional attire that made her blend in perfectly with the corporate setting. Walter Foster called the meeting to order precisely on time. We have a full agenda today, but the primary order of business is reviewing the strategic restructuring of our NIH transformative research project. Cameron will lead this discussion. Cameron stood and began a polished presentation about maximizing return on research investment and accelerating commercial pathways. He outlined the plan to redirect nearly 30% of our grant funds to the external partners he had selected, presenting it as a strategic masterstroke that would benefit everyone. The paperwork is prepared for immediate fund transfer, he concluded. We just need formal board approval and Dr. Green's signature as a procedural matter. He turned to me with a tight smile. I trust our conversation on Friday clarified the importance of this direction. All eyes turned to me, and I felt a moment of paralyzing fear. Then I caught Agent Rodriguez's steady gaze, and my resolve returned. I cannot, and will not, approve these transfers, I said clearly. They violate NIH grant terms and federal regulations on the use of research funds. Cameron's smile didn't waver. Dr. Green has some misunderstandings about institutional authority over grant administration. Perhaps Thomas can clarify the legal position. Thomas Reynolds cleared his throat and opened his folder. According to our review, the institution has broad discretion in administering grant funds within the general scope of the approved project. That's a misrepresentation of NIH policy, I countered, pulling out the actual NIH grants policy statement. Significant changes in scope or budget require prior approval from the NIH with endorsement from the principal investigator. Cameron waved dismissively. Bureaucratic details that can be managed. The important thing is moving funds quickly to our partners to accelerate progress. These partners, I said carefully, Quantum Analytics and Nexus Holdings, were formed just weeks before you joined BioVital, Cameron. Both trace back to your former business partner, Jackson Reed. A murmur ran through the room. Walter Foster frowned, looking between his son and me with confusion. That's irrelevant, Cameron snapped. They're qualified vendors selected for their expertise. They have no expertise, I countered. They're shell companies created to siphon federal research funds for personal gain. I have documentation showing the systematic pattern. Cameron laughed, though it sounded forced. Dr. Green is clearly under immense pressure and making wild accusations. Perhaps we should consider whether she's still fit to lead this project. Thomas Reynolds looked increasingly uncomfortable but said nothing. Walter Foster was watching his son with growing concern. I am not only fit to lead the project, I am legally bound to ensure proper use of federal funds, I said. And I have evidence that Cameron has been attempting to divert those funds from their intended research purpose. I opened my own folder and began distributing copies of key documents I had compiled, including emails between Cameron and the shell companies. financial records showing the connections and the pattern of attempted fund diversions over the previous months. "This is absurd," Cameron said, but his confident demeanor was cracking. "Thomas, show them the transfer authorizations. We need to move forward immediately." Thomas hesitated, then slowly pushed forward a document. "This authorizes the initial transfer of $12 million to Quantum Analytics for specialized research services." It was at this moment that Agent Rodriguez stood and moved to the table. "Mr. Reynolds," she said calmly, "is this the document authorizing transfer of federal grant funds to Quantum Analytics, a company with no employees, no research facilities, and a mailing address that is a post office box in Delaware?" The room fell completely silent. Thomas Reynolds looked like he might be ill. "Who are you?" Cameron demanded. Agent Rodriguez placed her FBI credentials on the table. "Special Agent Diana Rodriguez, Federal Bureau of Investigation Public Corruption Division. We've been investigating the systematic misappropriation of federal research funds at BioVital for the past 6 months." Cameron's face drained of color. He looked wildly around the room, then made a sudden move toward the door. It opened before he reached it, revealing 2 more agents in suits who blocked his exit. "Cameron Foster," Agent Rodriguez continued, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, misappropriation of federal funds, and money laundering. Thomas Reynolds, you are also under arrest as a co-conspirator in this scheme." The next few minutes were chaos, Cameron shouting about lawyers and rights, Thomas being handcuffed without resistance, his face a mask of resignation, board members in shock, some leaving hurriedly, others watching in horrified fascination. And through it all, Walter Foster sat motionless, staring at his son with an expression of profound disbelief and disappointment. When the agents finally led Cameron away, still protesting his innocence, Walter approached me slowly. "Did you know about this investigation when you came to the meeting?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I admitted. "I've been gathering evidence for weeks. The FBI contacted me yesterday after I reached out to the NIH with my concerns." Walter nodded slowly. "Thank you for protecting the integrity of your research in this institution. I fear I've been blind to what my son has become." The weight of everything that had happened suddenly hit me, and I felt my knees weaken. I sank into a chair, trembling slightly, as the adrenaline began to fade. "What happens now?" I asked Agent Rodriguez, as she finished giving instructions to the other agents. "Now we continue our investigation," she replied. "Based on what we've already uncovered, this goes beyond just your grant. Cameron Foster appears to have been operating similar schemes with other research funds since he joined BioVital." Walter, still standing nearby, closed his eyes briefly in pain. "I will cooperate fully with your investigation, Agent Rodriguez. Whatever my son has done, BioVital will make it right." As I left the boardroom that day, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. My research, my career, and BioVital itself stood at a crossroads, and the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. But for the first time in months, that path wasn't being blocked by corruption and dishonesty. For all the chaos and pain of the day's events, there was also a sense of relief. The truth, however difficult, had finally come to light. The week following the arrests was a blur of FBI interviews, emergency board meetings, and frantic attempts to stabilize our research operations. BioVital became the center of a media storm as news of the arrests broke. $80 million research fraud screamed the headlines, with unflattering photos of Cameron being led away in handcuffs splashed across every news outlet. The FBI investigation expanded rapidly. Agents combed through years of financial records, interviewed dozens of employees, and uncovered a pattern of fraud that went beyond what any of us had imagined. Cameron hadn't just targeted my NIH grant. He had been systematically skimming from multiple research projects since joining BioVital, using a network of shell companies to funnel money to himself and a small circle of accomplices. Thomas Reynolds, facing serious charges, himself quickly agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. His testimony revealed that Cameron had initially pressured him into cooperation with veiled threats about his family's financial security, but that he had later become a willing participant as Cameron promised him a percentage of the, quote, diverted funds. Most shocking to the BioVital community was the revelation that Rebecca Daniels, the new lawyer, had been specifically brought in by Cameron to create legal cover for the fraudulent transfers. She had previously worked for a firm known for helping clients navigate regulatory gray areas and had been promised a substantial bonus for facilitating the grant fund diversions. She was arrested 3 days after Cameron. I found myself thrust into a strange new role simultaneously, trying to protect my research team from the fallout while serving as a key witness in the federal case. The NIH temporarily froze our grant funds, pending a complete review, leaving us scrambling to maintain essential operations and retain staff who were worried about their job security. Walter Foster emerged as an unexpected ally during this chaotic period. Though clearly devastated by his son's actions, he returned from semi-retirement to take active control of BioVital again. In our first private meeting after the arrests, he was humble and direct. "I failed this company, and everyone who works here," he said, looking far older than his 65 years. "I wanted to believe in my son's potential so badly that I ignored warning signs I should have recognized. I'm sorry, Laura." "You couldn't have known what he was planning," I offered, though I wasn't entirely convinced of that myself. "A good leader knows what's happening in their organization," he countered. "And a good father knows his child. I failed on both counts." He straightened in his chair, some of his old determination returning. "But I won't fail in making this right. Whatever it takes, we'll rebuild BioVital's reputation and ensure your research continues." True to his word, Walter instituted sweeping changes. The entire finance department was restructured with new leadership and enhanced oversight protocols. An independent ethics committee was established with authority to review all financial decisions related to research funds. Most significantly for me, Walter created a new position, Vice President of Research Integrity, and asked if I would consider taking on the role alongside my continued work as a principal investigator. "We need someone who has proven they'll stand up for research integrity even when it's difficult," he explained. I was conflicted about the offer. Part of me wanted to focus exclusively on my research and put the whole sordid business behind me, but another part recognized the opportunity to help shape a stronger, more ethical research culture at BioVital. Grace encouraged me to accept. "Think about it, Laura. You'll have the authority to protect not just your own research, but everyone's. That's a chance to create real change." While I considered the offer, I also had to navigate the complex emotions of my team members. Some, like Grace, had stood firmly with me throughout the ordeal. Others had been unwittingly drawn into Cameron's orbit and now felt embarrassed or defensive. A few had been actively helping him, feeding him information about our research decisions or raising questions about my leadership to create the narrative he wanted. Rebuilding trust within the team proved to be one of my most difficult challenges. The NIH review of our grant was thorough but fair. Michael Bryant advocated on our behalf, presenting evidence that I had actively worked to prevent misuse of funds. After 6 weeks, we received word that our funding would be restored with enhanced reporting requirements, but no reduction in scope. The day we received that news, my team gathered for an impromptu celebration. For the first time since the arrests, the atmosphere felt genuinely hopeful. As I looked around at their faces, I made my decision about Walter's offer. "I'm going to accept the VP position," I told Grace after the others had left. "But I'm going to insist on some conditions. Complete transparency in all financial decisions. Direct reporting line to the board, not just Walter. And resources to create a comprehensive ethics training program for everyone involved in research." "They'll agree to all of that," Grace said, with confidence. "Walter knows how close BioVital came to destruction. And speaking of consequences, did you hear about Cameron's plea deal?" Cameron and his accomplices had indeed negotiated plea agreements rather than risk trial. Cameron would serve 5 years in federal prison and pay substantial restitution. Thomas Reynolds received a lighter sentence of 2 years in exchange for his cooperation. Rebecca Daniels got 18 months plus disbarment. The courts moved with surprising speed, eager to make examples of those who would misappropriate federal research funds. Through all of this, I struggled with my own complex emotions. Relief that the fraud had been stopped, anger at the months of manipulation and stress, guilt that I hadn't recognized what was happening sooner, and a persistent anxiety about whether we could truly recover the lost time and momentum in our research. I also found myself questioning my own judgment. How had I missed the signs for so long? Should I have gone to the authorities sooner? The what-ifs kept me awake many nights, despite the assurances from Agent Rodriguez and others that I had acted appropriately given the circumstances. You can't blame yourself for not being as devious as Cameron Walter told me during one particularly difficult moment. He spent his entire adult life in environments that rewarded that kind of thinking. You spent yours pursuing honest scientific discovery. Of course you didn't see it immediately. Gradually, over the months that followed, BioVital began to rebuild. Walter Foster made good on his promises, implementing all the oversight mechanisms I had requested and more. He established the Foster Foundation for Research Ethics, endowing it with $20 million of his personal fortune, as a tangible sign of his commitment to making amends. Our research program slowly regained momentum. With the cloud of corruption removed, my team refocused on our original mission, developing treatments that could help patients with neurodegenerative diseases. 9 months after the arrests, we achieved a significant breakthrough in our gene therapy delivery system, one that might never have happened if Cameron had succeeded in diverting our resources. When the paper announcing our findings was published in Nature Neuroscience, Walter framed a copy and hung it prominently in the BioVital lobby, alongside a new corporate mission statement that emphasized integrity and transparency in all research activities. "This is what we're really about," he told me, gesturing to the framed article. "Not financial schemes or corporate maneuvering, but advancing knowledge that can help people." Cameron never understood that. I never visited Cameron in prison, though Walter did monthly at first, and then less frequently, as the emotional toll became too great. From what Walter shared, Cameron remained largely unrepentant, convinced that his only real mistake had been getting caught. His lack of remorse strengthened my resolve to ensure that the culture at BioVital would never again enable such behavior. A year has passed since that fateful board meeting when Cameron's schemes collapsed. I'm writing this from my new office, where I now serve as Vice President of Research Integrity at BioVital, while continuing to lead my lab as Principal Investigator. The view from here is different, both literally and figuratively. I can see our entire research campus from my window, a constant reminder of the broader responsibility I've taken on. Our NIH-funded research has flourished in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days. We've published 3 major papers, filed 2 patents, and most importantly, developed a gene therapy approach that shows remarkable promise in reversing early-stage neurodegeneration in our animal models. We're now preparing for preliminary discussions with the FDA about a pathway to clinical trials, something that once seemed years away. BioVital itself has transformed under Walter Foster's renewed leadership. The ethical reforms we implemented have become a model for other research institutions, with Walter and I frequently invited to speak about creating cultures of integrity in scientific organizations. What began as a scandal has ironically positioned BioVital as a leader in research governance. One of my proudest achievements has been establishing the Scientific Integrity Training Program, now mandatory for all researchers at BioVital, from graduate students to principal investigators. The program goes beyond basic compliance, addressing the complex ethical challenges that arise in modern biomedical research. We emphasize that integrity isn't just about following rules, but about making decisions that honor the trust placed in us by funding agencies, patients, and the public. My relationship with Walter Foster has evolved into one of the most meaningful professional partnerships of my career. His humility in the face of his son's actions and his determination to make amends have shown me what true leadership looks like. While he still carries the pain of his son's betrayal, he has channeled that pain into positive change both at BioVital and in the broader scientific community. On a personal level, this journey has transformed me in ways I'm still understanding. The weeks of isolation and fear, As I gathered evidence, the confrontation in the boardroom, the chaos of the aftermath all left their mark. There were nights I questioned everything, days I wanted to walk away from research entirely. The weight of it all seemed too much to bear alone. But I wasn't alone. Grace stood by me through every difficult moment, offering both practical support and unwavering friendship. Agent Rodriguez, who became Diana to me, over the course of many interviews and court preparations, showed me that standing for truth does eventually yield justice, even if the path is difficult. And I found unexpected allies throughout BioVital, people who reached out privately to thank me or offer help once the truth emerged. The healing didn't come all at once. It came gradually through small victories in the lab, through building new relationships based on genuine trust, through seeing tangible changes in how our research organization operates. Each step forward helped ease the lingering anxiety and doubt. I've learned that integrity isn't just an abstract virtue, but a practical choice we make daily, sometimes at significant personal cost. I've learned that systems and institutions are only as ethical as the people within them choose to be. And I've learned that speaking truth to power requires not just courage in a single moment, but persistence through uncertainty and fear. Perhaps most importantly, I've learned that in the face of corruption, the answer isn't cynicism, but renewed commitment to the values that drew me to science in the first place. The pursuit of knowledge that can reduce suffering, belief that evidence and truth matter, and the understanding that the work we do as researchers is a profound public trust. If I could share one message from this experience, it would be this. When faced with the choice between the easy path and the right one, never compromise your integrity. You may stand alone for a moment, but ultimately, truth will stand with you. The momentary comfort of looking away comes at too high a price, not just for your peace of mind, but for all those who depend on you to do what's right. Today, our lab is working on a new research direction that could help millions living with early-stage Alzheimer's. The preliminary results are more promising than anything I've seen in my career. None of this would have been possible if we had allowed research funds to be diverted from their intended purpose. Sometimes a storm is needed to clear the air, and from the wreckage can grow the strongest seeds of change. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between what was easy and what was right? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story of standing up for integrity resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening. And remember, in the words of Walter Foster, integrity isn't what you do when everyone is watching. It's what you choose when you think no one is.